think I started to think about becoming a priest mostly because of the World War II. And everything that happened during the war was so stupid. And I thought there should be a better way to live in the world, and that maybe religion and faith, would be a proper answer to the problems of the world. So I think that influenced me about becoming a priest. Then after I decided to become a priest, I went to study. Then I realized I wouldn't like to remain in France, to be a priest in France. So I thought of going outside of the country, but I don't know for what reason, because of my personal feelings, I thought I would fit better in a cold climate than in the very hot countries. So there were many French congregations which sent missionaries to Africa or Asia or to South America. And one day I inquired if there were congregations or orders sending missionaries to the cold countries, and somebody said yes, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, and go to northern Canada. So I said, well, I'll join the Oblates then. And I wrote to the novice master in a little town of Pomain, and he said, well, come on September 6 or 7, that's when the novitiate starts. So I just went to the novitiate there and rang the bell, and the novice master showed up, and that was the first oblate I ever saw in my life. And then I just stayed for the novitiate and did my studies, 2 years of studies. Then I went to the French army for 1 year. And then I went back for 4 more years of studies. Then I was ordained priest. My gosh, that will be 40 years, July 1st this year. Yeah, it was in July 1st, 1952. Yeah, it's a long time.
And you were ordained a priest, and then what? What happened next?
Well, then I still had about 6 months of studies. Our studies ended in mid-February 1953. And we were 17 young men finishing our studies at the same time. And in our congregation, in the Oblate congregation, we get our first order, our first posting from our Superior General. And our headquarters is in Rome. So that was up to him to decide, where we were going to go. Of course, he follows the advice of people who know us, of our professors or superiors, and that depends also on the needs of the different missions. So some of us, we knew we would stay in France, or some would go anywhere in the world. And it's always a great feast, a great celebration, because families are invited and friends, and on that particular occasion, the superior of the scholasticate where we were studying thought that, we need somebody who is somebody to celebrate, to officiate at this celebration. So he asked Bishop Plumet, who was an oblate also, and he was a bishop in Cameroon in Central Africa. And that was a new mission in those days. That mission started in about 1945-46, right after the war. So that was really the mission in those days. That's where the tough guys were going, and everybody hoped to go there, I guess. And Bishop Plumet was very happy. He said, yes, he said, I'll go there for that celebration. He was very happy because, that would be some advertising for his own mission there. But 3 or 4 days, before July 17th, when we were going to get our posting, the Bishop Plumet phoned the superior at the scholasticate, and he said, I'm really sorry, I cannot go there. I'm sick as a dog, and I just cannot make it there. I said, sorry, but we cannot go there. So the superior at our scholasticate, was very annoyed. I said, what can I do? Now it's only 3 or 4 days to go. But he remembered that Bishop Falaise was retired in Lisieux, where St. Teresa's sanctuary is. And Bishop Falaise had been bishop in the Northwest Territories there for 12, 15 years. He was never a bishop in charge, but just assistant. And he retired there because he was kind of blind already. But he spent most of his time in Lisieux hearing confessions. So our superior phoned him and said, Bishop, can you come here? We need somebody there. We need a bishop at least, Can you come there? And Bishop Fallis is a good guy. And he said, oh yeah. I said, I'll go there. So he came there in a couple of days before February 17th, before the big day. And he went to see our superior and he said, Father, I said, I'm not curious, but I'd like to know, where these young men are going. So our superior said, yeah, Bishop, here are the papers. There were 17 papers, one for each one of us. And Bishop Fallis, flipped through the papers. And then he said, well, here's Father, here are your papers. I'm going back home. And superior said, why? I said, what's wrong? I said, you invited me for that day. And I spent 40 years of my life, in Mackenzie, in northern Canada, and there's nobody going there. He said, I'm not interested in your celebration. He said, I'm just going back home. So superior said, well, Bishop, you cannot do those things. Just wait a while. He said, maybe tomorrow morning we'll talk about it. And so the old bishop stayed there. And so I guess the superior phoned our superior general in Rome. Said, the old bishop is there and he's not too happy. He said, can you do something to please him? There's nobody in that group of 17 young oblates going to the missions. Can you send one to Mackenzie to please the old man? So the next day or so, our superior general from Rome, phoned the scholasticate where we were, and he said, well, Fumoleau, he had his posting as Cameroon in Central Africa. Just change him, he said, and write Mackenzie instead. And we'll send you the official paper, in a few days. So that's the way I came to Mackenzie. You see, that's the way God works. That's the way the will of God, happens to be. You see, we had our marching orders there on February 53. So I came here in May 1953, 2 months later. First I went to Fort Good Hope down the Mackenzie River, down the Decho River, where it crosses the Arctic Circle. And I was there 53 to 1960. 1960 I went to Fort Franklin on Great Bear Lake in Satu. And I was there from 1960 to 68. 68 I went back to Good Hope for about 1.5 years. Then the bishop transferred me to Yellowknife, spring 1970, and I'm still there, at least most of the time. Well, when I went there, in 1953, that was still a free country. There was hardly any government presence. The Indian agent came once every 2 or 3 months. And the Dene, were still free to lead their lives, as they wanted. You could build their house wherever they wanted in the village. You could go hunting more or less where you wanted. You could go trapping there, you could go fishing. There was really not too many laws and regulations. So that was still a free country. And the chief and the band council, were still in control of the village. Everything that went wrong, went to the chief and the councillors. And they discussed things, and really they were still in control of their lives. I think that's why the village was quite healthy. The family situation was quite healthy. The young people were still very respectful of their elders, of their parents. And physically that was very demanding. Because we were traveling mostly only by dog team in winter time, and on snowshoes, and in summertime mostly by canoe. So physically that was quite demanding, but I think mentally that was an easy life because because we didn't have to worry about laws and regulations or government restrictions or anything like this. So that was a good time. Yeah, I'm very glad I lived that period there, these few years in a small village.
And it's much more bureaucratized now?
Well, everything turned upside down in 1967 when the territorial government was transferred from Ottawa to Yellowknife. thought, and that was an invasion of bureaucrats and supervisors and directors and administrators and laws and regulation and all that, so everything fell apart. The Dene lost control of their communities. The children were taught not to obey the elders or not to obey the chiefs anymore, but to obey the game warden or the administrators or the director of this or the supervisor of that, and that the old people had led their life and it was the old days and it was not relevant anymore, and that the children shouldn't listen to their parents. That was said, positively like that. Don't listen to their elders, to their parents. They know nothing. Well, the kids went to school also, yeah. And, going to school wasn't the worst part. The worst part was then when the kids came back from schools, that the communities had fallen apart. And there was no more of the old system, of the old structures of the old social life, of the old family patterns, of the old social fabric that existed anymore, to receive their children. So everything just went haywire, everything fell apart. The economy started to change also, because, oil and gas were discovered just about everywhere, or new mines were created, and transportation system was what we call improved. I mean, everything went faster, and there were more planes and more mail service and more radio contact, and CBC came in suddenly. So, there were so many outside influences that really changed the community life.
How about the relationship between the people and the church? How did that change?
Well, for the Dene, most of the Dene are Roman Catholics, and a significant number also are Anglicans. And when I went there myself, in the early 50s, that was still the old mentality, where the church was still powerful in the north, had a great influence, and we were so many priests all over the north, and the bishop was still somebody. And that was the same, about the influence of the Anglican Church especially. And the churches, ran residential schools and hospitals, and the government didn't do anything about medical care or education in those days. So the churches, filled up that gap. And all those things lasted till about the 1960s, when new schools were built and new nursing stations were built, and then government took control of that. As far as the missionaries, I came there with the same ideas of the old missionary style that when I was young, prevailed in Africa or in Asia, in South America or in the North, more or less with the old imperialistic context, and when the church is all powerful and could dictate everything in those days. And it's surprising, how it's easy to become, authoritarian when you are in that position, either because of your own character or temperaments, or because of your education, because of your training.
So what changed that?
Well, things started to change really in the late 60s, not because of us. Started to change because the Dene started to question everything. They had always said yes to anything any white person would tell them, and suddenly they started to say, well, maybe, and a while after they said no. So because they were doing this rethinking and a re-evaluation of the situation, we had to do our own evaluation too, and to start, analyzing the situation. But they started the process, and we were fortunate because we joined them. In those days, in most churches, the priest was the important person, and the congregation had very little to say, And all the laws and the regulations, were dictated by outside forces. And the Dene accepted that as they accepted, the government system or the economic system that was forced on them. And slowly, they started to say that these old structures just don't make sense for us. And I think especially the authority structures in the church just don't fit with those people, because the whole politics in a community was and still is, to divide the power. The whole political system in a small community was to make sure that never one person or one clan or one family would be in a position of power to impose anything on anybody else. So the whole political life was to divide power, to make sure that nobody would be in a position to impose anything on anybody else. That was a very, very democratic system. And for example, somebody who had a kind of financial power because somebody was a good trapper or a good hunter or a good businessman never had a chance to have political power at the same time. It was too dangerous in a small community to have somebody with so much power, financial power and political power at the same time. So the thing was always to divide power. And then because of all the different forces, what happened there is what happened also in southern Canada. Most places in the world, a lot of people, quit coming to church. And the church was not a power anymore. And a lot of people retained their own spirituality, the old Dene spiritualities. But some people, when they rejected, church ways and Christianity, rejected also their own spirituality, and it's a tragedy for these people. But a lot of people, had a better way to evaluate the goodness and the power of their own spirituality. And that's a very healthy movement, because the whole Dene spirituality is very close to the gospel. It's something universal, which is trying to bring out, excuse me, which is something that is trying to bring out the best in every person and to realize, the depth of every person. So the Dene spirituality and the gospel spirituality, are very much alike.
Were there any particular instances where their spirituality taught you something or opened up a world for you?
Well, I went back to Fort Franklin a few years back, and I met somebody on the street, which is not a real street, but on the path. And said, I was walking along the lake shore, and over a mile away from the village, I saw there is a house being built there. The floor has been built already, and there is a wall halfway built, and another wall about 3/4 high. And I said, is there somebody building a house there? Well, he said, no. He said, it's not for anybody. Well, I said, what's that going to be? They said, and why is that house, so far from the village? And that person said, well, he said, we built a house there because the old man Eya used to live there. The old man Eya was a prophet, somebody with a special spiritual power, somebody who was able to help other people find answers to the real questions. And he had certainly spiritual power, there's no doubt, because I heard that from so many people and from the missionaries who lived there at that time. And he died in the late 1930s, I guess, and he's buried in Fort Franklin. And that person said, well, the old man used to live there, so you want to build a house there where the old man lived. And I said, well, what that house will be used for? One said that will be a house of prayer. Yes, that's a very good idea, a house of prayer there to remember the old man. And I said, well, but here's the big church right in the middle of town there, that's the house of prayer too. And the person looked at me and said, well, the church in town, that's for religion. But the other house there, that will be for our spiritual life. So then I decided not to worry anymore for these people. Yeah, I think, we're in a period where everybody is searching and trying to find new ways and experiment anything. And sometimes it's a painful period, but I think it's beautiful too. And we'll have to let people search in all directions as well, the missionaries and the people in the communities and the church itself, and try one thing and see if it works or not. I think people are willing to experience and to experiment. Yeah, I was in the bush one day with, for quite a few days, for a couple of weeks, with a family who lived in a little shack, and we were way far from everybody else, so that was very quiet. And there was the father and the mother and I guess 4 children at that time in that family. And that was in fall. It was not too cold yet, just a bit misty in the morning, a bit foggy sometimes, but it was still beautiful September days. And the children, of course, were free, to wander around. There was no danger for them. And one day, the little girl, who was at that time maybe 4 years old, came back home to the cabin, and she had picked up a handful of what we call Muskeg Tea, that little shrub that grows just about everywhere. And sometimes we use those leaves to make tea if we are short of real tea, or sometimes even we use these leaves. We mix these leaves with the real tea to give a special flavor. So we call that Muskeg Tea or the Labrador tea. And so that little girl came to the cabin with a handful of these little leaves and shrubs, and she gave that to the mother. And the mother was just ecstatic. And it was the first time that little girl had contributed anything to the family. So the mother was so happy, and the little girl too. And the mother took these little leaves and looked at them, and she thanks the little girl, with such reverence, and the little girl was so proud to feel how respected she was. And so the mother looked at that and for a while, and then she looked at me and she said, "Well, tomorrow it's Sunday, so you're going to say Mass with us?" And I said, "Yes." So she said, "Instead of using wine for Mass, I'm going to make tea from those leaves, and we'll use that to say Mass." Well, I had a few months coming. We call that sabbatical month. Some people call it holidays. It's just the same, but sabbatical looks more professional. It sounds more professional. So I use that term too. So I didn't know much what to do. I was thinking of going to a college or a university for a few months, but I don't think that was my place. So I decided to go to the Philippines for 3.5 months. I was there already 10 years ago. So that was a good occasion to go and visit friends again and meet new friends and learn about the new situations politically or new life in the church there. So that's why I went there. Well, I think that economically the situation is not any better than it was 10 years ago when I was there, for many reasons. The main reason is that this country is just bleeding itself to death to pay what is called the debt to the IMF and the Monetary Fund and the US and Canadian bankers. And now I was just angry to learn that that country, which is so poor, is paying all these bankers and the Monetary Fund, nearly $5 billion a day, which is half of their budget, when at the same time people starve and die, and medical care is just falling apart, and the education system is just falling apart when the kids are so eager to go to school. I never saw a country in the world when the small children or the older ones are so anxious to learn and go to school. And there is no money to buy desks, and there is no money to pay teachers, there is no money to build classrooms, because the people have to pay that stupid debt. That's just awful. That's just made me so angry to see that. Anyway, but there are signs of hope, because I didn't go everywhere, but wherever I went, I saw the basic Christian communities, which are really flourishing. There's a lot of reflection going on, not only in the situations, but what it means to be Christian in that situation. And the work that is done is really beautiful. And there are hundreds and thousands of small groups like these, studying that. And there are lots of new NGOs, the new non-government agencies, they call them. But some people call them the RGOs, the real government agencies. And that's really true, because that's where people are able to learn what is democracy, where people have a chance, to take part in all the decisions they take, and to learn really that the people know something and that they are able to make decisions for themselves. And these NGOs groups are really doing an amazing work of learning and sensitization of the people, of learning new ways. It's a new education process that is beautiful. A lot of cooperatives are doing the same work, and especially because of the election that took place on May 11th, the churches did a beautiful work for the past year, trying to educate the people about what it means to live in democracy, what are the roles and the duties of the citizens, and how they can really participate in the process. And all over the countries, there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who organize the workshops to learn about their role and their power and their duties. And that was really a wonderful experience. I was very fortunate I could assist in some of the workshops that were taking place in the last 2 or 3 weeks before the elections. And I was really amazed about how the people who were there were so serious about it. I mean, they were really concerned. And a lot of these people, hundreds of thousands of them, were delegated to go to all the polling stations on election day and make sure that everything was done orderly and with respect for the democratic process. And I think the learning that all these people went through, during these few months, probably is more important even than the result of the elections, than the outcome of the elections. Because those people with all this learning and this experience will never go back, and these people are going to change the country in 5 years or 10 years maybe. It was really a great sign of hope.
And now you're on your way back to the NWT?
Yeah, you got to go back home. Then I'll go and take part in the Dene seminar. That's a 2-week seminar for the 15,000 people who are interested in learning a bit more about the northern situations, about what happens in Dene, in the land of the Dene, and learn a bit more about the Dene culture, and to learn a bit more about the Dene tradition and spirituality. And all the people who come there, really go back really with much better feelings and much better understanding, not only about the northern situations, but also better understanding of themselves, because they have a chance to reflect on their own situations, on their own values, on their own feelings, on their own spirituality. So after 10 years, I thought that I had done my share and that was time to retire from that work. So I asked the Dene Cultural Institute if they would be interested in organizing the Dene seminar from now on, and they said yes. So I was very happy, because the Dene Cultural Institute is very serious and very well organized, and I know they can do a good work about the Dene seminar. So they're in control, they're in charge, but they invited me to go there for the first year. So I'm quite happy to go there also. And then from then on, I guess, they'll be on their own.